exactly 3:11 AM Tehran time. At an air defense base southwest of the capital, the alarm suddenly blared across the control room. On the radar screens, several unidentified objects had just appeared at a distance of roughly 124 miles, racing toward Tehran at speeds close to 497 miles per hour. The duty officer grabbed the communications handset and urgently reported to headquarters that a potential threat was approaching the capital from the southwest. Less than 30 seconds later, the entire air defense network surrounding Tehran shifted into combat mode. The outer defensive ring of S-300 PMU-2 systems began rotating their radars, prioritizing scanning sectors toward the southwest. Batteries of Bavar-373 and Khordad-15 moved into position, while lower-tier interceptors such as Tor-M1 and Pantsir-S1 activated their target locking procedures, preparing to engage what they believed were incoming missiles. The young officer was convinced he was about to score a major success. What he did not realize was that this moment would become the most fatal mistake of his career. In less than 10 seconds, the bombers accelerated past 186 miles per hour, tearing through the darkness and initiating one of the largest bunker strike operations ever conducted by this aircraft type. About 37 miles southwest of Tehran, a formation of 3 Israeli F-15 fighters was quietly advancing. They were the real strike package. If everything unfolded according to plan, within minutes, the largest fuel depot in Tehran would turn into a massive fireball. Inside the cockpit of the lead F-15, the Israeli pilot focused intently on his tactical display. Behind him, the other 2 F-15s maintained a carefully spaced formation, close enough to support one another, yet far enough apart to avoid appearing as a large, easily recognizable radar cluster on Iranian screens. Under each aircraft's wings hung Rafael Spice 2000 guided bombs, carrying roughly 4,000 pounds of precision firepower. The weapons were capable of striking extremely small targets from long standoff distances. The F-15 was the ideal platform for this type of mission. The twin-engine heavy fighter had not been sent here to circle in dogfights or demonstrate air superiority. It had been chosen because it could carry heavy payloads, approach at high speed, and deliver precise strikes against high-value targets within a very short window. More importantly, the F-15 allowed the strike package to maintain a steady approach while Tehran's entire air defense network was being pulled toward the southwest by the decoy signal. If the timing slipped by even a few minutes, Tehran would have time to rotate its radars back, reprioritize interception targets, and close the brief window that had opened. From the moment the Israeli formation entered the final approach corridor, every second had to be nearly perfect. 3:14 a.m. Inside Tehran's Air Defense Command Center, the first signs of something unusual began to appear. The strange signal from the southwest was not developing the way a real strike formation normally would. Something did not match the expected pattern. Several officers began requesting cross-checks of the data. By this time, the Israeli formation had already penetrated deep enough to deliver the decisive blow. The final command confirmation came through the lead pilot's headset. On his tactical display, the massive fuel storage complex west of Tehran gradually came into focus like a thermal map. Primary storage tanks, pipeline networks, pumping stations, and supporting infrastructure connected directly to the capital's fuel distribution system. This was the target. The Israeli pilot gently tightened his grip on the controls, lowering the F-15 by a few hundred feet to maintain the optimal attack path. Behind him, the other 2 fighters immediately adjusted, maintaining the triangular formation exactly as planned. The entire formation began to accelerate slightly, stabilizing at approximately Mach 0.8, fast enough to reduce exposure inside the threat zone while still maintaining bombing accuracy. At that moment, inside Tehran's Air Defense Command Center, a new warning indicator lit up on a secondary display. A medium-range surveillance radar had just detected a weak reflection from the southwest. But this time, the contact was not one of the faint signals seen earlier. This one was larger, clearer, and heading directly toward the capital. An officer immediately issued the order. Verify the target. Priority lock. The S-300 PMU-2 radars rotated their scanning sectors again. The system began building a track file, a digital record of the target's movement. But to fully confirm the contact, the computer required several stable radar sweeps. And in aerial warfare, those extra sweeps sometimes decide everything. In the skies west of Tehran, the three F-15s had now entered the outer defensive zone. The Israeli pilot noticed a radar illumination warning flashing on the electronic warfare display. An Iranian radar site had begun attempting to lock on. Radar spike. 2 o'clock, the weapons officer called out. The lead F-15 immediately banked slightly to the right, adjusting the approach angle by only a few degrees. It was not an evasive maneuver. It was a subtle adjustment designed to alter the aircraft's radar reflection geometry, forcing the Iranian tracking system to spend several extra seconds stabilizing its lock. And those few seconds were exactly what Israel needed. 3:18 a.m. A Bavar-373 battery west of the capital finally confirmed a high-speed target entering its engagement zone. The launch command was issued. 2 surface-to-air missiles blasted from their launchers almost simultaneously, tearing through the night sky. Solid fuel boosters pushed them rapidly past Mach 4 within seconds. Inside the F-15 cockpit, the missile warning sounded. Missile launch. The Israeli pilot reacted instantly. The lead F-15 pulled hard on the control stick, rolling left before diving into a moderate descent. At the same time, the aircraft's electronic warfare systems began broadcasting continuous radar jamming. False signals flooded the airspace, forcing the missile guidance systems to differentiate between the real aircraft and multiple artificial reflections. Behind him, the 2 other F-15s separated slightly from formation, each shifting altitude by several hundred feet to disrupt the radar tracking geometry. On the control screen of the Bavar-373 battery, the target tracks began to oscillate. The missiles were still closing in, but their guidance paths were no longer stable. One of the missiles lost lock first, detonating in mid-air hundreds of meters away. The second continued for a few more seconds before its self-destruct system activated. Inside Tehran's command center, officers began to realize that this threat was far from a simple target. But by now, the Israeli formation had penetrated too deeply. On the tactical display, the massive fuel storage tanks appeared as huge thermal signatures. Pipelines connected them in a dense network across the western outskirts of the capital. The lead pilot received the final confirmation. Target locked. He stabilized the aircraft for a few seconds. Then, he pressed the weapons release button. Tonight, these pilots had just become the most powerful men on Wall Street because with a single press of that button, they had just pushed global fuel prices upward. 2 Spice 2000 bombs dropped from the pylons under the F-15's wings, falling several meters before their control fins deployed and guidance systems activated. Moments later, the 2 trailing F-15s released their weapons as well. 4 guided bombs began racing toward the fuel depot. On the ground, Iranian radar systems began detecting small objects descending rapidly from above. Guided munitions inbound. A nearby Tor-M1 battery attempted to rotate its radar to intercept. But the system's reaction time was barely enough to identify the targets, not enough to complete a full firing sequence. The bombs were already too close. Exactly 3:20 a.m., the first weapon struck. But the attack was not over. Above the battlefield, the B-52 formation initiated the second strike wave. This time, GBU-31 JDAM bombs began falling. These were the finishing blow. 2 seconds later, the second bomb struck the main pumping station. The explosion shattered the primary pipeline system. Liquid fuel poured out and ignited almost instantly. Within seconds, the entire fuel complex turned into an inferno. Storage tanks began detonating in a chain reaction. From tens of kilometers away, the blaze was already visible above the western skyline of Tehran. Inside the Iranian Air Defense Command Center, warning screens turned red. One officer shouted, "The fuel depot has been hit!" But by then, the F-15 formation was already leaving the area. After releasing their weapons, the three fighters accelerated again and banked southwest, exiting the combat corridor before Iranian air defenses could organize another interception attempt. Behind them, Tehran's largest fuel depot was burning. A massive column of black smoke rose into the night sky. And in just a few short minutes, a precise strike had turned one of the capital's most critical logistics hubs into a sea of fire. The flames from the western Tehran fuel complex continued to intensify. Massive storage tanks, each capable of holding between 200,000 and 500,000 barrels of fuel, began detonating like enormous artillery shells. According to energy analysts, the entire complex had the capacity to store more than 10 million barrels of refined petroleum products, enough to sustain Tehran's transportation and industrial activity for many days. But within minutes, the entire system had become an inferno. Major pipelines were torn apart. Liquid fuel spilled across the transfer yard, forming burning streams stretching hundreds of meters. As the fire spread to neighboring tanks, secondary explosions began rippling through the complex. But at Imam Ali base, the consequences of the strike had only just begun. From central Tehran, residents began noticing a red glow rising along the horizon. Many initially believed a petrochemical plant had exploded, but as the first videos appeared on social media, the situation became clearer. A massive column of black smoke was rising from the fuel storage zone west of the capital. The strategy allowed Iran to maintain retaliatory capability even under preemptive attack. But the dawn strike had targeted the system's greatest vulnerability. Not the missiles, but the ability to bring them outside. Inside Iran's military command centers, damage reports began pouring in. What worried officers most was not simply the fire. It was the location of the depot within Tehran's logistics network. From this site, fuel was pumped into the capital's primary transport pipelines, supplying hundreds of gas stations across the city, as well as military installations and logistical bases around Tehran. Destroying this depot meant that a major portion of Tehran's fuel distribution system had been disrupted instantly. Energy engineers were urgently summoned to assess the possibility of restoring the network. But even before full reports arrived, one fact was already clear. Tehran had just lost one of the most critical links in its fuel supply chain. News of the strike quickly spread beyond Iran. International media outlets began publishing the first satellite images showing the massive smoke plume rising from the fuel depot west of Tehran. Energy analysts immediately understood the significance of the strike. Iran is not only a major oil producer, it is also one of the most important energy export hubs in the Middle East. But for military strategists, the strike carried a far larger meaning. It demonstrated that even missile bases buried deep inside mountains are not entirely immune to precision-guided weapons. Energy traders in London and New York monitored every new update coming from Tehran. Images of the burning depot quickly became a signal for something markets always react to strongly: supply risk. As analysts sometimes joke during moments like this, a single pilot pressing a bomb release button over Tehran can shake Wall Street, and tonight, that is exactly what happened.